Hello everyone! The third week of Genshin character betas are usually the times where significant kit changes are made, and this is the same for Emilie. She received very significant buffs this time around that make her very strong in her niche, maybe even too strong. Her kit still works the same as an off-field Dendro TPS, so it's not like her entire identity as a character or her gameplay mechanics were changed, but the majority of the changes are just number increases, which are great for her. So let's go over how Emilie was buffed and analyze how strong she is after the changes. First, let's start with Emilie's skill, the most important part of her kit. Her level 2 Luminous case damage, aka her Dendro turret, was increased from 135% times 2 hits to 151.2% times 2 hits at talent level 10. If we assume a 31.5 second rotation, the level 2 Luminous case should hit enemies about 18 times within that time frame. And doing the math, we can see that there is a 583.2% attack multiplier increase after the buff. Of course, shorter rotations means that the increase will be a lower number, but the point I want to make here is that this buff is great for Emilie because her level 2 Luminous case is a large portion of her damage. Another small change regarding her skill is that the attack range of Emilie's Luminous case was increased from 12.5 meters to 16.5 meters. The old range was already pretty big, so this range getting buffed is just another nice quality of life, ensuring that enemies are practically almost always in range to Emilie's turret. And finally, the AoE of the level 2 Luminous case's attacks have been slightly increased. Before, each turret hit had a very small AoE similar to the small AoE of a Hyper Bloom. This increase is nice when enemies are very grouped, making it easier for the turret to potentially hit multiple enemies. It is unclear how large the AoE increase is, so while I do think the attacks will still be single target oriented, it's a nice quality of life buff nevertheless. Next, her burst was also buffed. Remember that Emilie's burst is practically just extra damage when you use it, acting similarly to Ganyu's burst. Its multiplier was increased from 252.54% to 390.96% at talent level 10. The burst hits 4 times in single target, so after the buff, the burst gained 553.68% multiplier increase in single target, potentially even more in AoE situations. Keep in mind, however, in my opinion, Emilie should burst every other rotation to keep ER requirements low, so you won't be taking advantage of the increased burst damage from this buff all the time. Still a great buff. Her passives were also changed. Her A1 passive, which periodically shot out coordinated attacks as long as there were burning enemies, was buffed. Each of those attacks got a 100% multiplier increase. In a 31.5 second rotation, you can get around 6 A1 procs, meaning that after the buff, you get a 600% multiplier increase. Again, great damage buff for Emilie since her A1 is another large portion of her damage profile. Her A4 passive and special passive were swapped and also changed a bit. Emilie's special passive is now the one that gives the party 85% power res against burning damage, so this hasn't really changed, it's just on a new passive. And her A4 is now the one that gives Emilie extra damage percent against burning enemies. But now, instead of just getting 36% damage bonus, you need attack on Emilie to achieve that damage bonus. For every 1000 attack, she gets 15 damage percent, up to 36 damage percent. With this wording, you need 2000 attack to get 30 damage percent and 3000 attack to get that remaining 6 damage percent to max it. This seems weird to me that you get so little from building 2000 to 3000 attack. It could work in a way that it actually scales linearly so that you only need 2400 attack to max out the buff. It's still unclear at the moment, but if you want a safe TLDR, as long as you have 2000 attack, which you should have if you're building Emilie correct with crit and attack, you will get the majority of the damage bonus. And lastly, Emilie's constellations were buffed. C1 now increases the damage of her skill in A1 passive by 20% instead of 10%, so a nice damage buff. Next, her C2 was completely reworked. Instead of just giving Emilie attack percent, C2 reduces the enemy's Dendro resistance by 30% for 10 seconds when any of Emilie's Dendro attacks hits an enemy. If your team is running a character holding Deepwood, like for example Chomacan, this constellation isn't as effective because 4-piece Deepwood already shreds Dendro. For teams that can't fit this artifact set, then this constellation gets significantly stronger. And finally, Emilie C6 got a slight buff. Each of her Dendro infused attacks from C6 now scales off of 300% of Emilie's attack instead of 250%. So as you can see from her base kit to her constellations, Emilie was just buffed across the board as long as she is in a team that utilizes burning. They don't seem like drastic changes because the updates were just number value changes to Emilie's abilities. However, this is a big deal because increasing talent numbers means increasing damage. And remember, all Emilie provides to a team is a burning aura and damage. She provides no buffs, so she needs to deal a lot of damage in a team in order for her to be worth to use. And looking at some sheets after these buffs, she looks to be be very strong in burning oriented teams like Burn Melt and Mono Power Burning, both teams that should have a consistent burning aura on enemies. With the buffs and in a proper burning team, Emilie does about 20 to 30% more damage at C0, which is a pretty insane damage increase. To visualize this, here are some calcs done by JStern25 on his stream. Definitely check him out if you haven't already. Try not to take just the DPS number at face value. For instance, the near 80k DPS ones for the pyro teams are only that high because the rotation times are 30 seconds compared to the 20-second rotations for the Burn Melt teams. The number is not higher because the team is quote better. So here are the main takeaways of the current calcs. Burning pyro teams like with Arlecchino and Linny look quite strong, allowing for another strong team archetype for them in a similar vein to Mono Pyro. For instance, if you were playing Mono Pyro with a double Geo core of Chiori and Zhongli, Emilie is looking to deal more damage than Chiori in this team at the moment, so replacing her is a strict upgrade. Burn Melt teams with Enemy look good as well, especially the ones with Wriothesley. Emilie is looking better than Nahida in a Burn Melt team with Wriothesley because of Emilie's raw damage. Now if we compare this Burn Melt team with Wriothesley's current best regular burn team, which is with Farina, Bennett, and Shangling, the two teams are actually very similar in team DPS. So the fact that Emilie on the team is performing similarly to a team with Farina does speak to the strength of Emilie with the current buffs. While the two teams I mentioned look to be some of Emilie's top teams and is supported by calcs from Theory Crafters, there are more potential team comps that can also utilize burning, like with quick burn teams adding Electro, air fryer teams with Animo, and potentially some variations of Burgeon that can actually maintain some burning. Although I haven't seen any calcs on these team variations, as long as the team can keep burning on an enemy, Emilie will be strong because she needs burning to deal damage, especially with this buff. One final note in regards to Emilie's strength in her potential teams. As I mentioned before in my previous videos covering Emilie, she can be used in non-burning teams such as Aggravate and Bloom, and the teams should still function. Because these teams don't have burning, however, Emilie will be doing very little damage in these teams as she loses access to a lot of her kit's multipliers, and her role in these teams will only be to apply Dendro with her turret skill. Although she doesn't apply that much Dendro, especially without her A1 coordinated attacks since there's no burning enemies on these teams, her turret style Dendro application can still be useful in multi-wave content. Unfortunately, because of the lack of burning in these teams, most if not all of the significant buffs I talked about in this video in regards to damage and number increases don't apply to Emilie in these non-burning teams. Yes, it seems obvious, but I do want to clearly point out that HOYOverse is clearly designing Emilie for burning oriented teams, so you really should be pulling Emilie with the intention of playing these burning teams. With Emilie receiving such a drastic increase in damage within burning teams, it actually begs to question whether or not she was buffed too much. Will HOYOverse tone her damage down in next week's update, which should be the finalization of her kit? In my opinion, I think Emilie being very strong in the burning niche is perfectly fine, and she doesn't need to be nerfed to be balanced in any way. Yes, she is looking to be very strong in burning oriented teams, but remember that burning teams are very niche and restrictive, as in most other team comps, the burning reaction is a detriment to that team. So just like other restricted characters like Chevreuse and Nilou, Emilie's strength is in a way balanced by her being less versatile in team building. In addition, strong characters are needed if HOYOverse wants to revive weaker team archetypes and make them actually usable. Burning has never been a particularly strong team comp, so Emilie needs to be strong in order for the burning niche to start being viable in the meta. It's in a very similar fashion with the release of Navia and Chiori making Geo much more viable, and I think at the moment, Emilie at her current strength does exactly what is needed for burning teams to start becoming meta, and very likely this is just a stepping stone to what characters and kits will release once Knotline comes out. So hopefully Emilie's kit remains pretty strong when she is finalized and released. I hope this update and analysis video was helpful to y'all. As always, leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed, it helps me out a ton. Don't be shy to leave your thoughts and questions in the comments below, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.